Welcome to Chapter 2 of the Nash equilibrium in optimizing the constitutional principle of proportionality, a boundary model for collision between fundamental rights. Last episode, we learned that fundamental rights due to their gradual nature cannot be cancelled or be absolute, and the exercise is subject to limits. So, when a collision between principles happens, that must be solved with the aid of a specific method called proportionality test. In this sense, according to Jurisprudence and general theory of fundamental rights, today we will study the wedding law process as well as the operation of bounding formula of ALEXY. By the end of this video, you will learn the following: how does the bounding law process, the bounding formula, and the triadic scale of ALEXY operate. Also, you will learn the jurisprudence methods for optimization of principle in cases of application of proportionality test and a formal definition of optimize. Then, according to the semantic problem of legal argumentation and the necessity of rational decisions, we will propose the hypothesis of our model to optimize fundamental rights with Nash theory of games.
Chapter 3: The bounding law process and operation of the bounding formula of ALEXY.
In the framework of the general theory of fundamental rights and semantic theory of legal argumentation, the development of optimization model is intended to configure and harmonize the elements defined by various constitutional courts, jurisprudence, and ALEXY bounding law in an epistemological scheme. According to ALEXY, the law of bounding can be divided into three steps. In the first step, it is necessary to define the non-satisfactory or affectation degree on one of the rights. Then, in the second step, we define the importance of the satisfaction on the right that plays in the opposite direction. Finally, in the third step, we must define whether the importance and satisfaction of the opposite right justifies the restriction or non-satisfaction of the other. In order to structure that, ALEXY proposed his weighting formula. As we said in last episode, principle of proportionality is divided into three sub-principles: adequate reversibility, necessity, and proportionality in the narrow sense. ALEXY points out that a collision between principles can be modeled rationally by operating with scales of intensity range. As we said, in order to apply the three sub-principles, ALEXY proposed the following function to which he denominates the bounding formula, to whose element we will frequently allude during this video. Hereinafter, I and J will be understood like subindex. GPIJC relative bounding of the principal right PI with respect to the principal or right PJ in relation to the application of a certain appellate measure in division. IPJC intensity of the restriction or affectation on PI in a specific case, which results in the relation or reciprocal expansion of PJ, WPJC, as an effect of said appellate measure. GPIA, the degree of bounding on PI in abstract sense with respect to PJ, GPJA. SPIC, security of empirical assumptions, which relate to the meaning that the judicial appellate measure has in the specific case for the non-realization of PI and the realization or expansion of PJ, SPJC. Next, we will analyze ALEXY bounding formula performance represented by the variable GPIJC, which is required to be weighed as part of an exercise of constitutional control over a given appellate measure under review. In this figure, we represent a conceptual scheme of the Pounding formula of Robert ALEXY, which illustrates the triadic scale associated with this formula for weighting the degree of restriction or affectation on the principles of fundamental rights. For example, the intensity of judicial control, and on the other hand, the epistemic scale is detailed to assess the safety or material sanctity of the specific appellate measure. ALEXY calls WI to the non-relaptive concrete way, for example, the importance of PI, the principle determined by the product of IPIC and GPIA. The assessment of the necessity for the appellate measure, SPIC, with regard to another alternative, is performed by the application of the epistemic scale. As regards the denominator of the formula, we found the parameters corresponding to the principle that is confirmed PJ, which, in their legal connotation, are reciprocal in the pounding process, WPJC and GPGA. The variable SPJC represents assessments of the necessity of the appellate measure. It is not necessarily in reciprocal relation with SPIC. It's paired in the numerator. About this effect, ALEXY points out that the principle demands maximum possible realizations relative both to the material possibilities as the non-legal possibilities. The sum principles of suitability and necessity express the method of optimization relative to the factual possibilities. In turn, pounding in narrow set does not play any role. It is a question of preventing certain interventions in the fundamental rights. They are available without cost of another principles. That is to say, it's the Pareto optimum. However, the principle of proportionality in the narrow sense refers to the optimization of legal possibilities. This is the field of pounding, the only one that will interest in this text.
P1 and P2, and that is very important. When taken together, that is, as elements of a single system, proscribe the use of M. This shows that the principle of suitability is nothing other than an expression of the idea of Pareto optimality.
The triadic scale of Robert ALEXY schematizes the notion of proportionality and reciprocity between two fundamental principles or rights. In ALEXY's interpretation of the reasoning of the German Federal Constitutional Court, a small restriction on IPIC is expected to reflect a reformation, or yet an increase in the relation of PJ with regard to SPIC and SPJC, the need for the judicial appellate measure that values the aforementioned Constitutional Court with regard to PI and PJ through the epistemic scale. In this sense, ALEXY states that the greater an intervention in a fundamental right, the greater must be the certainty of the premise that support that intervention. This second part of the law of pounding carries the predicate of epistemic, because it is not based on a specific material importance of the reason that sustains an intervention, but on its epistemic quality. According to ALEXY, the sub-principles express the idea of optimization relative to factual and legal possibilities. Expressly, ALEXY points out some principles of suitability is nothing other than the expression of the idea of Pareto optimally. Based on our interpretation, this figure represents the reciprocal interaction between the principles PI and PJ by means of two shaded areas. Under this idea, a restriction on IPIC by moving the cursor to the left reduces its lower area and proportionality increases the open area WPJC. In Mexican jurisprudence, as well as international jurisprudence, optimization mandate is quite clear and based on the need to achieve certain characteristics in specific cases of application of the principle of proportionality. Such characteristics are, in specific cases, it is necessary a suitable retarded retaining tuning in the restriction or rising collision contrasted against the gradual found in the abstract sense for the relation of the expansion of the principles in conflict. Metaphorically, we can imagine that in hyperspace, the intensity of the specific measure, the law or act of authority on the review, is a force designed to delimit and define a container that restricts the expansion of legal principles or fundamental rights in the abstract sense. Since the rights in the abstract sense, according to ALEXY's theory, reflects the aspirations to general rights of society. So, we have a two-force struggle in the opposite direction. One that is purpose is to restrict the legal measure that is specifically reviewed, and the other that wants to exacerbate as much as possible the aspiration of the people, fundamental rights in the abstract sense. Thus, the principle of plausibility plays the most important role in the application of the principle of proportionality. However, such principle is not operationally represented in the Phyton formula, as we will see in the next episode. Then, it is required to apply probabilistic criteria on the suitability of the applicable measure, and finally, it is required to estimate the benefits and the costs of the judicial constitutionality control. The Spanish Real Academic Language Dictionary defines the notion of optimize as finding the best way to carry out an activity. In English language, Cambridge Dictionary defines optimize as to make something as good as possible. So, definitions of optimize in natural languages are very generic. For this reason, within this reference framework, it is essential to define with great precision and operativity the notion and scope of the term optimize, which require more rigorous and pragmatic connotations in the domain of decision analysis theory. In order to understand the historical evolution and current connotation of the term optimize, the work of Phyton and Dieter offers a summary panorama from great antiquity to the present day. Through notable contributions by mathematicians such as Legendre, Fermat, Newton, Leibniz, Euler, Gauss, Cauchy, Lagrange, Kuhn, and Tucker, Kantarovich, among many others, to the modern approaches of Datzin, Kachigyan, and Karmarkar. As a road of synthesis, mathematical optimization refers to the maximization or its dual minimization of multivariable function called the objective function, subject or not to a certain set of constraints. In general terms, the optimizations may include linear, nonlinear, or both decision variable mixes. On the other side, in the domain of game theory, John Forbes Nash develops a combinatorial scheme to determine the best balance of a set of strategies and decision variables for two agents or players in terms of game theory. Its philosophy is different from the classical scheme of optimization described by Phyton and Dieter. The former's nature and structure will be applied later in episode 5 and 6 of this video series. Such a scheme is called Nash equilibrium and constitutes the basis of our model to optimize the principle of proportionality. Semantic theory of legal argumentation has demonstrated that in the natural languages, it is not possible to distinguish the analytical from the syntactic aspect of legal argumentation. So, to analyze the inferential consequences of legal reasoning, we need to formalize it in a metalanguage. This metalanguage will be our optimization model based on our theory of legal decision. In this sense, our model of optimization is located within the framework of the following hypothesis. Logicity of judicial motivation is decisive to achieve and to expand fundamental rights in a specific case. Therefore, the collegiate dialectic in thematic context favors the highest possible degree of consensus as well as the congruence of decisions between legal operations, and by virtue of this, they progressively converge to the Nash equilibrium. That means that degree of consensus depends on the degree of congruence, and this last depends on its logical grade. Logicity, L, represents the rate of formal consistence in rational election during the weighting process with the static cardinal scales. We will see this detailedly in episode 5 and 6. We can say that logicity is philosophical and logical mathematical notion that denotes apodictic and syntactic consistency in the text or an argument by its form, according to the rules of logic and regardless of its material content, persuasive rhetoric, or language games, whose intentionality is completely understandable to the common of people, for its clarity and absence of ambiguities and contradictions. This is our own interpretation. The term does not exist in the Dictionary of Real Academy of Spanish Language and Cambridge Dictionary in English Language, although it is used in the scientific and legal literature. Under our theory of legal decisions and technological free software resource that we will see in next episodes, our model will allow the participation of endgamers or end constitutional judges and end fundamental rights or principles for determining the best scenario of combinatory strategies that optimize values, general principles of law, or fundamental rights. This is the best mathematical strategy for an agreement, a scenario denominated the Nash equilibrium.